and welcome back to another episode of the Choose954 Podcast, episode number 106, with our upcoming CreativeZen speaker, Charlotte Dune. If you didn't know about Choose954, myself, Evan Snow, and my business partner, Mr. Andrew Martineau, started a social movement to cultivate culture and community here in Broward County, where I'm very proud to be born and raised from, in an effort to keep people in the know with all the great things that are going on, make this a better place to live, and not just a better place to vacation, because we live here. The point of the podcast is to connect you with interesting people like her that have done quite a lot in their lives and are continuing to do quite a bit, which we're excited to preview her story that she'll be sharing in full at our next CreativeZen Talk on Friday, February the 14th at NSU, which we'll give you some more details on. But without much further ado, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started on this journey and made your way all the way up to the State Department and writing books?
Yeah, well, I'm Charlotte Dune, and I'm a writer, a novelist. I have made films. I have done experimental videos. I really consider myself a multi-purpose creative person, like a multimedia creative person, because I've experimented with almost every single medium for trying to convey my artistic vision. And as you said, I also worked for the State Department for 2 decades-ish, basically from the time that I was 23, 22, something like that, like fresh out of school, basically, until I was in my mid-30s and decided to leave the department. But let me backtrack before that. I grew up in rural Appalachia, along the border of Western Virginia and West Virginia. And I think that childhood experience really colored and shaped the kind of creative work that I'm into now, because I grew up in nature. It's like very pre-internet, very pre-cell phone.
Right.
And being in such a rural area, I really didn't even have television. I didn't have cable TV. I lived quite a sheltered life. My parents were hippies, and they had decided to buy land with some friends at an auction for like nothing and live in the woods. And they built a geodesic dome. And that's where I grew up with my brother and the other child of the friends. And I didn't really interact with other kids until I went to school. And even then it was like pretty far, like my friends would be a 30-minute drive away. So I spent a lot of time in the woods, a lot of time in nature. And I think the being in nature really, all that time in the woods really made me interested in human connection with plants. And so as I look at like the broader themes of my filmmaking work and like my books now, which are heavily about psychedelics, it's about human plant interfacing and like human interfacing and communication with nature. And I took a detour into government stuff and human kind of tragedies and violence, but I kept coming back to nature and decay and like the human body's relationship with plants. But I'm maybe getting ahead of myself again.
It's a fascinating time for plants and fungi, and it seems like we're, obviously inching closer and closer to the regulations changing and the rescheduling. More and more people you hear are microdosing or experimenting, or even now, I think we're probably at a peak of the amount of people that have gone down to do ayahuasca. So it is an interesting time, but I have never seen it conveyed from this perspective. And your novels explore themes like self-discovery, psychedelics, love, and healing from trauma. How did you decide to focus on these themes, and do they have personal significance to you?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I was working for the government for many years. So I was in a very like locked down kind of bureaucratic environment with a lot of rules. And then when I decided to leave the department, while I was in the department, I got the opportunity to make films while I was working for the government. So I made some films for the government. And then during that time, I also got the opportunity to do a sabbatical and study documentary media and documentary film production.
Wow.
And so that kind of like reunited me with my more like creative childhood roots. But as I was coming out of that experience, I decided, I really want to leave the government. I really want to do creative work. But I also had trauma from the experience because I had served in areas that had conflict, areas that weren't safe. I had seen terrible things. I had PTSD, like diagnosed. I had diagnosed PTSD. So I was looking for healing, and I started hearing about ayahuasca. And I had dabbled in psychedelics when I was younger. So I wasn't a stranger to psychedelics, which they're not even supposed to take people into the State Department with that have had these kind of experiences. But the fact of the matter is everybody lies about it. So I'm past the statute of limitations for being like arrested for lying. So I'll just say like, I was not honest on my application, but I was not doing drugs at the time I was in the department, but I had, dabbled in psychedelics before. But I started hearing about ayahuasca. And I was like, wow, I thought I had done everything there was to do. No, there's this like whole new world. And actually, I had served in Cameroon as part of my State Department tour. And I had heard about people talking about iboga and ibogaine, which is the psychedelic also. But at the time, I had been too scared. I actually thought people were crazy for going into the jungle and doing this in just like the jungle of Central Africa. I was like, they're nuts. Like, that's dangerous. Like, I didn't want to do it. I just had heard about it. But I think it stayed in the back of my mind. And then I kept reading about it. And then I would, stumble onto reading about ayahuasca. And like, I started to hear the call of the grandmother medicine, as they say, called ayahuasca grandmother medicine. So I started to hear the call. And at this point, I had already written one book, and it was about my experience in Uganda. And I had gotten an agent for that book. And I was in the process of like negotiating I had a literary agent. I was in the process of negotiating a publishing deal for that book. But then COVID hit, and the publishing deal kind of got like put on hold. And I was like, I want to just have some kind of experience. And I was talking to my brother about how I wanted to go to Costa Rica or somewhere when COVID was over to, try ayahuasca, or to go to Peru and try ayahuasca. And he was like, you can just go to Hialeah to try ayahuasca. And I was like, oh, what? So I went and got my ayahuasca experience that I had been looking for. I found a local group, and I had a powerful experience where I don't know how else to explain it except to say that I had a brief flash of telepathy with another person that I knew in another country. And this became the basis of my first book, Cactus Friends. I don't know if you guys can see that on the camera, but Cactus Friends, a psychedelic love story, Charlotte Dune. So the book, it doesn't follow my exact ayahuasca experience, but it became the kernel that began the book. And I also then went on to do a San Pedro ceremony, some additional ayahuasca ceremonies, a psilocybin ceremony. And it also really helped with my PTSD. Like, it didn't completely get rid of it, but it really helped. And it led me on a journey where I did completely get rid of it.
Wow.
So it was like the first step towards that process, because I didn't even realize how bad I had it. Like, it was worse than I had thought.
Sure.
But then also after that ceremony, I reached out to the person that I had had the telepathic experience with, and they confirmed. I don't want to give too much away because it's like the beginning of the book.
Sure.
And I was just like, wow, I've experienced magic. Like, I think I was 35 at the time. I was like, I'm 35 and magic is real. Who knew?
Correct.
And, I thought I had just like lived all over the world, been to so many places, seen it all. I had not seen it all. I was just about to see some new stuff. So I was like, magic is real. And then I just had the experience where I got the complete novel, like a total download, which had not been my experience writing the other book at all. And I actually pulled out of the other publishing deal and parted ways with the agent because I was like, I didn't like the direction they were taking the book. I didn't think they were staying true to my story. They were kind of taking it in the wrong direction. And I just wrote this book as like a break. And because the ayahuasca had given me this entire book, and I was like, I need to get it down. And I didn't think I was necessarily going to publish the book. But then one thing led to another. I submitted it to a contest and got positive feedback, was like shortlisted for the contest. And then I was like, I'm just going to publish this. Like
Self-publish.
This can't be that hard. Yeah. And so I'd actually talked to a small press, but then I was like, what is the small press really doing that I can't do myself? Like they were having me do so many things that I was like, I'm just going to self-publish this for fun. And around that time, I met another writer who had also left her corporate job in tech. She'd been working for big tech, and she had moved to Mexico, and she had started to write. We were talking, and we decided to start a writer's support group because she had just begun her publishing journey.
Nice.
And I was just beginning mine. And we ended up having, because it was still COVID, we ended up having a lot of interest in the group, and that group still exists. I still do that group every single week. It's been running for I think almost 3.5, 4 years now.
Wow.
And called the Writers Support Group. And those ladies in that group taught me a lot about publishing, taught me a lot about getting my book into the world. And then I went on to write the second book, Mushroom Honeymoon, which follows the same couple, and they end up traveling to Hawaii. And this book really explores, the first story is about the woman and her kind of experience getting in touch with her own powers. And the second book is really about the male character who also has PTSD. So that was, me putting a little bit of myself into him. And it's about his healing journey and him finding some relief from his PTSD and an addiction as well through ayahuasca. So that book is about psilocybin and ayahuasca, which is like an analog of, it's a way to make ayahuasca using psilocybin as one of the active ingredients.
Wow.
It's like psilocybin plus an MAOI inhibitor. So that's what that book is about. And then I'm writing a third book that is called Ayahuasca Star Child that hasn't been published. That's going to be in that series. And then I also just got another book download at some point. I started writing a short story for fun, and it turned into this novel, which is more dystopian, but it's also about humans interfacing with nature.
Amazing.
So I just rambled on for
no,
so long.
Well, no, that I wanted to ask about it.
Please stop me.
Who did the covers?
So much.
Who did the covers?
So the cover was done by an Italian artist named Giulio, and he was doing a lot of product design for a local brewery, Lauder Ale.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Lauder Ale. Love Lauder Ale, by the way. Great place.
Shout out to Lauder Ale.
Shout out to Lauder Ale. They have non-alcoholic beer too for anybody that needs a non-alcoholic option, and kombucha. But I saw their beer and I was like, I love the package design. Can I get in touch with the artist? So they connected me with the artist, and he did that. And then a different British artist did this one because I wanted it to be in a different genre. Interesting
that you mentioned that, because I just got an email from Lauder Ale that they're asking for help as everybody goes through tough times. And this is a Broward-centric podcast under Choose954. So if you haven't been to Lauder Ale, definitely go give them a visit to support. You never know. Maybe your next book cover will come out of a visit from there. And it's funny because the owner of Lauder Ale also, I thank him in the special thanks of this book, because I don't want to say too much, but he really also partly inspired me to start writing these books. Oh. So it's a very local
he connected me to the original group that I started sitting with for ceremonies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So,
And that was a good synopsis without giving away the meat and potatoes of the book.
yes, because I'm going to be giving away more stuff at the talk on the 14th.
And if you're not familiar with CreativeZen, we host a monthly breakfast lecture series, a mini TED Talk every second Friday morning of the month, which you attended last month when Candy Lopez spoke. This event was where I had my aha moment that led me down this path of arts, culture, community building, creative entrepreneurship, and all these things that I never could have imagined. So I like to continue paying it forward by hosting it, keeping it for free, bringing in local people to share their thought-provoking, inspiring story, because you never know who's going to be sitting there in the audience yearning for a nugget of inspiration if they know it or not. It's a free event. We do it with support from the Circle of Friends board of the Alvin Sherman Library, which is on the campus at NSU. So there's coffee, breakfast bites. We do guided meditation to help put everybody in a relaxed Zen state. I am just finishing up my sound healing certification, and I'm actually going to bring the bowls to help for the guided meditation next month. So you can find that event online. It's CreativeZen Talks. It's a free event, and she'll be posting it. We post it. It's on Eventbrite, on the internet, and all that. But this is a topic, as anyone that's read my book knows, is near and dear to my heart, because psychedelics, specifically psilocybin mushrooms, have had a profound impact on my life personally, professionally. It's helped me deal with the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, the death and loss of friends to cancer, as well as just so many things that didn't work out that I couldn't process otherwise, that helped give me immense clarity. But for those that maybe are unfamiliar with psychedelics, how do you approach the topic in a way that's accessible, relatable, and I guess the one that probably comes up the most is like not scary, because they did such a great job of scaring us with your brain on drugs when Nixon's opponents really wanted to give him a hard time, that they went and outlawed all these psychedelics that are now used legally and providing so much benefit to troops and people with PTSD. So how do you approach this topic in a accessible and relatable way?
Well, I think my novels are the first way, because they reach people that might not just be reading articles about psychedelics. They might pick the book because they want more of like a romance, because there's a romance in it. But it's a good conversation starter. For example, I just spoke to a group of retired older women, and they had so many questions. Some of them had, a few of them had memories of their days as flower children and, trying some acid or eating like a mushroom chocolate. But most of them were just like, what's ayahuasca? We've never heard of it. And I always tell people I'm not the ambassador for ayahuasca. It's not my culture. I'm just a tourist in this land, in this magical land, which is the perspective of the character too. She's a photographer, and she goes into the ceremony really from an outsider's perspective into this Colombian ceremony in the novel, and just tries to be respectful of the culture. But I think I also always tell people, it's not for everybody. You really need to do your own research. I personally think that reading books is a lost and underrated activity that more folks should engage in. And I would say my favorite book on ayahuasca is The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby. That is a great place to start. The Paul Stamets books are a great place to start. The Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, is a good one.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, there's one called The Ayahuasca Reader, which I read, that's great. It has like lots of different little essays. So I really think that I really advise people to read. There's also some good documentaries. There's the Spirit Molecule documentary. There's a documentary focusing on soldiers with PTSD and them taking the ayahuasca. There's actually so much now. I feel like it's really exploded even within the past 4-5 years. So I really advise people to don't go in blind. Like, I don't know, I'm an information person. I like to do a lot of research. I like to get a lot of information before I do things. I think one of the things that initially triggered my interest into this subject actually was an interview with Aubrey Marcus, where he was talking about his Wachuma experience, which I do write about Wachuma in Cactus Friends. And I was so taken with that. This was before I had even learned about ayahuasca. I wanted to go and I wanted to go and take Wachuma where he had gone, but unfortunately the shaman had passed away. So it didn't really exist in the same form. But I think however you find your way into this, it's important to research, and if you're taking medication, to be aware of contraindications, and if you have any history of bipolar or schizophrenia, you have to be a lot more careful. But if it's calling you, I tell people, go listen to the call. Don't ignore the call of magic.
Correct.
Or God, or people have different theories about what it is, but I personally believe that it's connecting you to another channel of consciousness, or it's expanding your own perception so that you're able to tap into things that we can't normally tap into in our waking life.
Correct.
So it can be very profound. It can be scary, though. I don't want people to think that it's not always scary, because it can be scary. But I think it also opens your creativity. It can open your heart to different things, new experiences, help with depression. The research shows that people have even improved memory if they're sitting in regular ayahuasca ceremonies, or just having increased community, like this spiritual experience, because a lot of people don't go to church. A lot of people don't have any spiritual experiences. I think also yoga is a great and valuable tool to combine with psychedelics if you're physically able. I feel that my own yoga practice has helped me deepen my relationship with the psychedelics, and also move through maybe things that might have been scary, but because I have these yogic techniques that you can kind of know your body in a different way. So I think yoga is a great compliment. Actually, yoga is a great complement to both writing. Say anything you want to do, add in yoga, add in reading, you'll be doing better at whatever you want to do.
If you focus on the breath, which number 1 or number 2 rule in yoga is don't forget to breathe, then it does help. Because yes, and I'm glad you did mention that, because it's not always all peaches and rainbows. No. And that's why they call it, amongst this world we live in of doing the work, sometimes you are facing tough challenges, the loss of a loved one, a relationship, business or personal or otherwise not working out. But when you go inward and reflect and do the work on yourself, that's when, with great risk, there is great reward. Sincerely encourage anybody. All the books you mentioned are great resources. Michael Pollan, also, if you can watch the Netflix special, which really clearly outlined it, but the book goes way further in depth with the history. But yes, if you, the two biggest things generally it's recommended to focus on, the set and the setting, the mindset of the state that you're in. You ideally want to be in a, positive, peaceful, open and expansive mindset, not, a deep down and depressed mindset. And then the setting you're in, being mindful of a comfortable environment, where the bathroom is, where the water is, no one's going to come surprise you. People say, go do it outside in nature. I am staunch preacher of doing it at home in a comfortable setting and environment, because if you're doing it out in nature, anything could happen. But if you do your research, you can have tremendous breakthroughs in your life, personally and professionally, as they've both served the purpose for us and our writing. Because I wrote the book during COVID, in part in Costa Rica, with support from the mushrooms. But thankfully, it's interesting that you're right. There's a lot of writing about this space from the informational, educational perspective, but your work and your writing is more
fiction.
It's fiction, but obviously you're weaving in parts of your story as well.
Yeah.
So what do you hope readers take away from your novels about love, trauma, and self-discovery?
I hope that they take away that things can change. Things can always change. Don't ever give up hope. And look for the magic around you. Connect to the magic around you. It's there. You can connect to it.
If you're open to it.
If you're open to it, you can connect with it, and you can thrive, and you can step out of your comfort zone and do difficult things and have new experiences and some people are very afraid of change. Like I hear some people say, I don't want to do that because it's going to permanently change me. And I get that too. But I think for me, the change was so beneficial. Thank God. I'm so glad that I had that change. I needed the change. And my life has been even more amazing, since then than it was before. So I'm truly, truly grateful that it exists and that people have brought it to America and that the keepers of these traditions are sharing them with us, and that we're also interfacing with these plants and consciousness and each other. And I don't know, I'm a big fan. And, maybe it'll change. Like people, you have seasons, and some things are not for, some things are for some, and some things are for others. I know people that love Bufo, and they had such amazing experiences with Bufo. And for me, I'm like, I'll never do Bufo again.
Right.
I'm done. It wasn't for me.
Right. The toad.
Yeah, the toad. So, you just find what works for you and what inspires you, and read more books.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize that point again.
And some of them are inherently more psychoactive and psychedelic in nature and mind expansive. And then some of them are, from what I understand, and there was a really great podcast recently with Joe Rogan where he had Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, and one of the leading lawyers that's pushing for the legalization of Ibogaine for PTSD for the troops on. And the interesting thing with Ibogaine, from what I gather, is it can shorten the time that it generally takes for people to naturally get off of opioids, if that's even possible, from 18 months down to 36 hours with this, plant that is illegal in this country, but has been used for thousands of years in Mexico and I guess in Africa as well. So certainly if you know a veteran, or if you know somebody struggling with PTSD or opioid addiction, there are resources out there. Do your due diligence. And hopefully, maybe this, even talking about your books and on this podcast and with this talk, can potentially help inspire somebody to take a change, to change their life, their family's life, or whoever's life that they care about that might be struggling and not have resources.
Yes. And actually, I'll say one more thing about this in case anybody is watching that has either PTSD or is struggling with addiction. So in addition to the PTSD, I was really struggling with alcoholism for a long time. Functional alcoholic was what I was doing. And another thing that pushed me towards the ayahuasca was in my journey with trying to get sober and stay sober. I came across a group called Recovery Elevator, and the founder of Recovery Elevator, Paul Churchill, he does a podcast, but he also went and he was feeling like he was going to relapse, even though he had been sober for a long time and had been doing this podcast. And so he went and did some ayahuasca ceremonies, and it re-strengthened his recovery journey and just helped him get through this potential relapse to where he didn't relapse. And I heard him talking about this, and that was the point where I was like, okay, I really need to go and do this, because I think I had been sober at the time for maybe 2 months, but I was starting to get real fidgety. Mm-hmm. Like the pink cloud was gone, and I was, feeling anxious in my own skin and just still dealing with this unresolved PTSD. And in the first ayahuasca ceremony I did, when I went, because you drink the ayahuasca, you're in this ceremonial space, and then after about 30 minutes, your stomach starts talking to you. And in the group I was sitting with, they call it getting well, not getting sick, but getting well. So you go into the bushes, they dig these holes in the ground that are like graves, little graves, and you get well, you vomit into the ground.
Purge.
You purge. And as I was getting well, and I hadn't had anything to drink for, 2 or 3 months at this point, it was like I was throwing up red wine. I just saw myself throwing up so much red wine into this hole in the ground. And I was vomiting, and it was like I was just vomiting every ounce of red wine I had drunk. Sounds crazy, right?
I believe it.
But I think my body needed to like conceptually let go of that. And my sobriety like continued on. I'd try some psychedelics, but alcohol was the thing I had a problem with. And then at one point, and I'm like, I know this is a rare story. People don't even like to hear this kind of story. But I think the combination of the ayahuasca journey, working on my PTSD, doing all the yoga, reading all the books, increasing my neuroplasticity and like my working memory, and just being able to deal with things that needed resolving. I think that my alcoholism was just purely coping with the PTSD. Once it was gone, I just had this moment maybe like 4 years later where I was like, I'm pretty sure I can just have a glass of wine with dinner and be fine. And I was like, this is a gamble. I don't recommend people doing it, but I did it and I was fine. I had not relapsed. I just will have like one glass of wine and it's like completely decharged. Like I am no longer addicted. I'm no longer having an addictive lifestyle. Like I'm no longer suffering from addiction, because addiction is so terrible. You suffer so much. It's awful, and I feel so bad for people going through it. So that's another thing, is like, there's hope. You can overcome it. You can even go back to being a normal person, just a normal, non-addicted, like glass of wine, and you don't care, and you get to experience what everyone else is experiencing that wasn't an addict.
Right.
Because they'll have, the addiction community will have you believe that once an addict, always an addict. I don't believe that at all. I know it's controversial. I'm like, I hope to write about this in future books. That's a topic on my mind for future projects. But I've met so many people through these kind of experiences, and I know it's not the truth anymore because I've experienced it myself. So I think that's something that science will eventually catch up with and figure out, and it'll eventually trickle into these other recovery communities. But yeah, I can't recommend Recovery Elevator enough. If people are struggling with addiction, go back, listen to those episodes. It's a great community. And I actually started volunteering for that community for a while. And then I was working with them, hosting a movie club that they had where we would watch like movies about addiction and have discussion groups. Brought my like past filmmaking experience into helping other addicts, talk about their experiences in this like movie addiction group.
Wow.
So it was also really positive and rewarding. And yeah, I have a lot of love and compassion for people that have suffered from addiction and suffered from PTSD. And I'll just also mention, just in case anybody needs help and is listening to this, the other thing that I found that was incredible, life-changing, I wish I had had it sooner for the PTSD, is a technique called RRT, Rapid Relief Therapy. And that's the only type of therapy. And it's also a one-shot experience. It's actually about the length of an ayahuasca ceremony. And a man who had been running a home for like battered and raped women invented it. And it's a technique that helps. It's like a combination of EMDR and neuro-linguistic programming that's done with a trained facilitator. And I would say that experience was as beneficial as an ayahuasca ceremony in just like helping clear out the rest of the trauma that was really like stuck in my body, because your trauma will get stuck in your short-term memory when it needs to go into your long-term memory. So when it's stuck in your short-term memory, your body thinks it's happening like right now. And so your body has to be in this like elevated state because it's happening right now because it's in the short-term memory. And I think the ayahuasca ceremonies, or maybe like psilocybin, if that's your medicine, or maybe it's just yoga, but these kind of things help, and RRT, they help move the trauma from the short-term to the long-term memory. And then once it's in the long-term memory, you can just forget about it, like you forget about, or it's like decharged. Your
Right.
body doesn't have to be thinking it's happening right now and freaking out that it's happening right now, or like crying because you're thinking about it like it's happening right now, and so it's making you cry.
There are tools and resources. I've heard great things about EMDR, and I have a dear friend that's an NLP instructor, and obviously some people just find immense benefit, as I did, from yoga.
Yeah.
And you can just practice yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breath work, and sound healing or whatever that tool is. But there are tools and resources out there for people to help with whatever the situation is that you're facing. And also, I mean, we're both obviously avid readers and writers, and I'm so glad that people can find insights, even if it is fictional or based off of some true events, off of your writing that can potentially inspire them to change their life or see a different path or look at it a different way. Who have been some people, either writers or other creatives, that have inspired you in your work?
Oh, good question. Well, I mentioned some, like in the books that I mentioned about psychedelics, but other writers that have really inspired me. I really like Jeff Vandermeer. He's a Florida-based writer, and he writes cli-fi, which is like climate fiction.
Wow.
And he's awesome. He wrote Annihilation. I was very inspired by him, especially for this book, Acid Christmas, which is about a blizzard that starts and doesn't stop, and like what that does to a city.
Wow.
But Jeff Vandermeer, and he's also doing amazing rewilding projects where he's working on preserving Florida wetlands and working on rewilding properties that have been cleared, and just doing a lot of environmental protection for Florida. He has a nonprofit that's also working on these things, but his writing, he does weird fiction. So I'm very, I gravitate towards the weird fiction. I'm a total Stephen King fan. Like, that was my first, adult novel that I ever read and like really loved, was Stephen King. I love Toni Morrison. There's so many writers that I love, but I definitely think Jeff Vandermeer. I was also inspired by some of the older writers. I love Philip K. Dick. I love Joan Didion. Like, there's writers from my parents' generation, Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes.
Which, another resource, so this is my fiction work. I also write a nonfiction Substack. I think I'm on my third year of the Substack. It's called Charlotte Dune's Lagoon. And I said I wasn't going to niche. It's a publication for people who refuse to niche. So it's just really a blog. It's about whatever I want to write about, but I end up writing about kind of culture, sometimes psychedelics, sometimes like the internet, sometimes just current events related to books. So I have written about trauma, recovery, addiction in that publication, which I do every week. Like, I try to do one every single week. Sometimes I miss a week, but mostly every single week. And so that is also a place to find. I have written about the RRT experience, and I've written about, different things that I've explored. I'm an experimenter. I'm always experimenting with things, always trying things. I like to do photography or like video editing as a hobby. So that's also a place where I experiment with different mediums and different creative ideas that I have.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's at charlottedune.com if people want to go find it. It'll get them there.
Dunne.
Dune.
Dune, one N.
Charlotte Dune, like the movie Dune.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is also another book I loved. I grew up reading sci-fi. My dad was a huge sci-fi fan, and he read Dune out loud to me when I was in like third grade.
That's a good start.
We didn't have TV.
Right. Where can they find you on social media?
Charlotte Dune. I mainly hang out on either Instagram or X, even though I know people don't like X anymore. I'm still there. I still like it there. There's a lot of psychedelic stuff and tech stuff, and I'm interested in the future. I'm really excited about the future, actually. And I love that AI might let us interface with plants even more.
Correct.
And understand the language of animals and understand the nature around us. This is something I'm very excited and interested in, and so I still like it over there.
Okay, and then the Substack is Charlotte Dune's Lagoon?
Charlotte Dune's Lagoon, but you can go to charlottedune.com and it'll take you straight to the Substack.
Okay, and if they join us, they might, on the 14th at NSU at 8:30, they might get a free gift?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so a little more incentive.
I'll have a treat for everyone.
Yeah, it's and it's a great event.
I wish I could just give everybody some mushroom chocolates, but I don't think it's going to be like that. Some breakfast LSD, but no, that's not happening.
It's another talk we could do.
That's another experience.
Club.
When drugs are legalized, which I'm also a big advocate for decriminalizing nature. I don't think people should be in cages for taking plants to expand their minds. I'm horrified that we've been doing that. So I'm a big advocate for legalization of, I call them entheogens.
Yep. And we are getting closer thanks to the good folks from MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. They've, gotten us close. They were about to get the MDMA for PTSD through. It looks like it's going to take another couple of years, but we are inching closer, and there are some states that are obviously already changing their regulations. So it is on the horizon. So you don't always have to go to Costa Rica or South America or other places. The last question that we like to wrap up both here on the podcast, we can go on all day, but I'll be respectful of your time. Why do you choose the 954?
Why do I choose the 954? The weather. I can't lie. I love the weather here because it lets me be outside in nature year round. I was stationed in Toronto before moving here, working for the State Department in Toronto, and it's just, so cold. So my family's here. I came here for the weather. I do wish that it was less, I do wish we would slow down on developing the area, because I think we are losing way too many trees, way too many wild spaces. There's way too much concrete. We don't have I am not without critique for the 954.
Sure.
We need public transportation here
100%.
Badly.
100%.
But I also love the cultural melting pot. It's such a cultural melting pot here. And I love the diversity here. I would love to see the inequality reduce a little bit here. I think this is actually, I've lived many places, and I think that South Florida has the worst inequality I've ever seen.
It's the least affordable county for housing. It has one of the biggest disparities and gaps in wealth, for better and for worse. Hopefully some of the wealthy
I don't know how to fix it, but
can opt to contribute to local causes like Zero Empty Spaces to make art more accessible or other things more accessible. But that was very well put. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your life to join us to share your story of more of a full story. This was just a preview on Friday, February the 14th.
I know I didn't even get to my decade in different countries in Africa.
Well, we will get there.
Or making an award-winning documentary film. So you'll have to go to the talk to hear about that.
Correct. And certainly follow, subscribe on social media, on Substack to get some updates.
Is the talk also going to be recorded?
Yeah. So we'll have it. We'll have it on our YouTube page. We'll send you the link. You can put it on your pages as well.
Put it on my Substack.
We'll share some social clips and do that whole thing. And, we just enjoy doing this because it's the right thing to do to share these stories. And, you never know who's going to glean that nugget of insight that could change their life. So CreativeZen Talks, Friday, February the 14th at NSU, coincidentally Valentine's Day, to tie in with the love stories.
Love Day. I'm wearing red because I'm like, it's Love Month coming. I'll just start it now. And I guess it's Chinese New Year's too. So I was like, oh.
Yes, it is.
Red.
If you know somebody that has an interesting story that should be on the podcast, don't hesitate to reach out. Always looking for new guests, new stories to share. Would love to hear why you choose the 954, and hope to see you at CreativeZen or another upcoming event in the future. Cheers.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.